Hello and welcome to episode 305 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
Hello, Jason. It's going well. How are you, sir?
I'm all right, I guess, if you ignore all the externalities to the airline industry and everything terrible that's going on. Just focus on the airplane news. Unless you're Air Busan, things are pretty good right now.
Things are pretty good unless you're Air Busan. And a few other airlines. We'll get to them in a moment. I will note that we're recording slightly early today because I have to get off to a Girl Scout investiture ceremony. But I
don't know what that means,
doesn't.
but if there are cookies involved,
There are cookies involved. There
So
are
you're doing okay.
100%
All right.
cookies involved.
That's great.
At least I hope there's cookies involved.
If there aren't, I think you're being scammed.
Well, I'll bring my own cookies. I'm definitely being scammed. I have a daughter who's selling me cookies. I'm definitely being scammed.
I mean,
But it's
they're
okay. It's all
they're
for
good cookies, Ian.
They
so
are
it's
good
okay.
cookies. They're so good. It's just the Scots selling popcorn. Like the popcorn versus cookies thing, they just don't stand a chance.
No, come on.
Anyway, so I say all that to say that who knows what'll happen after we hit stop on the recording this week. But there has been some news that broke before we recorded. So we'll get to that in just a few moments. But we will start the week's show with a big boom. Well, actually, a little boom.
A little
mini boom. A baby boom.
Not breaking news, but they broke the sound barrier, which is something.
It's something. Yeah, it's a step in the boom aerospace ladder to supersonic passenger flight, a remarkable achievement in its own right. Now, this podcast has discussed in the past the reality, shall we say, of bringing a commercial supersonic transport to the world, a revival of supersonic passenger transport. We've discussed the economics of that. We've discussed the technical feasibility of that. And we have a great episode of the podcast with John Ostrower that we did, a few years ago now, discussing all of that, and it still holds. But I think we let them take their lap here and say congratulations to Boom on their achievement of the breaking the sound barrier once again and see where it takes them from here.
Sure. I don't want to say it's all for nothing. An achievement is an achievement. It's the first non-military flight to break the sound barrier since Concorde. Don't know if this ever pivots to actually become a commercial, viable, economical, ecologically sound thing. Probably not. But right now we can simply be happy that they did a thing, that they live streamed it from an air-to-air aircraft, which is cool. I bet they're kicking themselves over the choice for using an iPhone to record air-to-air because it went out of focus at the critical moment when the aircraft went supersonic, because of course it did. You were using an iPhone.
And we've talked about the issues with iPhone autofocus through airplane plastic
through any window. Yeah, it ruined my video on the Logan Air Twin Otter at Ibarra. It decided when we were taking off, instead of, focusing on the nice tire and the sand and all the water being kicked up, no, it was only concerned with the grain of sand on the window. That is what needed focusing. And that is exactly what happened to Boom during the moment they broke the sound barrier. The iPhone said, you know what? I really like this window. I'm going to focus on that. And you can't tell it not to do that because they didn't use a real camera. Whoops.
You live and you learn.
Been there, man. I feel you.
Yep. The NTSB is investigating an accident involving a United Airlines 787 that occurred over the Ivory Coast earlier this week. The aircraft experienced unexpected movement, climbing a few hundred feet before falling several hundred feet, and then having a rather unstable altitude for a few minutes before regaining its altitude. So it started at 36,000 feet, went up to 36,150 feet before falling down to 35,000, just slightly over 35,600 feet, and then had inconsistent altitude and high rates of change in the vertical speed before reestablishing itself at 36,000 feet. Multiple passenger as in crew experienced non-serious injuries, though there were, I believe, 4 people taken to the hospital and checked out. The aircraft remains in Lagos where the flight diverted. And the NTSB has been delegated the investigation by the Ivory Coast authorities. So they have taken up understanding what happened on this particular 787. I will note that the same aircraft on the same flight diverted the previous flight. That was an unrelated diversion for a passenger medical issue when the aircraft returned to Accra. So that was unrelated.
A 787 doing weird things in regards to sudden altitude shifts. Really feels like we've heard this story recently, at least a couple times before.
Yeah, I would agree with that initially if it were not for the initial climb in altitude. What Jason's referring to is the LATAM 787 and I think another incident.
Was it Qantas, I think?
Maybe. But where the seat switch on the captain's seat, there's a switch on the back of the seat that allows you to move the seat so that you can get in and out and when you're not in the seat itself. But that can move the pilot sitting there forward if the seat switch has not been covered properly and forced the rather dramatic and sudden descent of the LATAM 787. That was the result of an investigation. Then they issued a, hey, cover your seat switches bulletin. But this began with a climb.
Yeah, if you're pushing the seat forward into the column, it's not likely to make the aircraft climb since that's the opposite movement. But
right.
Story is very similar, but I guess we will wait for the NTSB to do its thing. Nice of the Ivory Coast to hand this off to the NTSB and say, hey,
we don't want any part
we're
of
over our head here. Why don't you take it over? That was probably a good call.
Yeah. Preliminary reports expected within 30 days. And then I assume we'll eventually get a final report, though.
Check back at episode 505.
Pretty straightforward. Speaking of reports, the Jeju Air preliminary report was released on Monday. And the preliminary report, like all good preliminary reports, raised more questions than it answered. But what is notable, and what I want to bring up here, is that the investigators confirm two things. One, that there was evidence of bird strikes in both engines. We don't know anything beyond that. They just say that there was evidence of bird strikes in both engines. They sent the DNA out, the residue, I don't know.
Bird remains.
Bird remains, thank you, for DNA. And that came back to Baikal teals.
Sure.
Was the species of bird.
Here I was thinking Canadian goose again.
No, not. Smaller, but apparently more numerous in their migration patterns. But bird strikes in both engines. And when I said raises more questions than answers, there's evidence of bird strikes in both engines, but there's no word on the effect of those bird strikes on either engine. So we know from video evidence taken at the time that at least one of the engines was not operating properly, given the multiple concussive sounds and the flame shooting out the back. So we know that's not supposed to happen, but we don't know to what extent the capabilities of either engine was degraded. So that's an unanswered question there. And then we also have the recorders stopped. Both recorders, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, stopped 4 minutes and 7 seconds before the end of the flight. And the preliminary report releases a precise second at 58 minutes past the hour and 50 seconds. And that is the same exact time that we stopped receiving ADS-B data. So that tells us that both of those things happened at the same time. We're not exactly sure why both of those things happened at the exact same time. And that's something that dovetails in with the we don't know to what extent the engines were degraded. Because the aircraft did continue to fly and make a turn and line up with the runway 4 minutes and 7 seconds later.
Yeah, and the Korean report, which is in English, thankfully, so we will link to it if you would like to read it, unfortunately doesn't really give us any information. Doesn't even mention the status of the flaps or the status of the landing gear or anything like that, both of which famously were not deployed to any degree. Doesn't mention it. They're leaving all of that to the final report, which is going to take, I suspect, quite a long time. But it sure seems like we're probably never going to have those answers, especially now that it is absolutely 100% confirmed that the recorders both stopped 4+ minutes before the end of the flight, which is really unfortunate. But at least now, the one piece of information I feel like we've learned about this aircraft is now we know for a fact there was a bird strike in not one but both engines, and that's not nothing, but it doesn't give us anywhere near the full story of what happened up there.
Exactly. For their part, South Korean investigators say the next phase of the investigation will, quote, tear down the engines, examine components in depth, analyze the CVR and FDR and ATC data, and investigate the embankment, localizers, and bird strike evidence. So all of it. It will investigate all of it. South Korean investigators also have their hands full now with an Busan A321, which was mostly destroyed, severely damaged, crispified during a pre-departure fire. 169 passengers, 6 crew, and a maintenance engineer were on board. All were evacuated safely, with just a few of them suffering minor injuries during the evacuation. It is basing this information on initial reports. It is believed that an unknown object in one of the overhead compartments may have sparked the blaze. So cue your standard lithium-ion battery warning. Of course, an investigation is underway already. The initial investigation performed by Korean officials to ascertain whether or not this was a criminal act doesn't seem to have turned anything up. So now it has been turned over to the transportation investigators from South Korea, as well as the French BEA, which is sending 4 investigators to South Korea to assist with the investigation. As this was an Airbus A321, the French are the investigators for the state of manufacture. So they'll be involved in figuring out what happened here and why.
Yeah, and not sure how old this aircraft was. I don't have the registration in front of me, Ian, just so you know. The one you have in the show notes is a Korean 747-8I. So don't post that one in the show notes. You'll get someone very angry replying to us. They are, in fact, different aircraft. But yeah, Air Busan's 321s range anywhere from 7 years old to 21 years old. So it could be, not such a great loss to. It's a little new for an aircraft to be burned down. But as a reminder, and we don't have to tell you this, you're all smart people listening, but lithium-ion batteries are stupidly dangerous. It's kind of crazy that we all just walk around with one in our pocket all day, because if you puncture it, it will burn excessively in a way that you cannot stop. If you are traveling with a battery bank or anything with a lithium-ion battery that even looks suspicious, if your screen is popping out of your phone or the battery's expanded or anything, please do not take it on board an aircraft, because this can happen. And if it happens at altitude, you're going to have a much worse day than the passengers on board this aircraft had, because it could get out of hand really quickly. So this is the kind of thing that it's up to every one of us to not be stupid, which I know is really tough for society right now. But if you even suspect that a device you have has a bad lithium-ion battery, please don't take it on board an aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen, report after report after report of good luck where people have caught things ahead of time or noticed something. But yeah, be super vigilant about these things. That's why they can't go in the hold with a passenger aircraft. Let's go to Russia and talk about a couple things. One is, we'll get this out of the way real quick. I'm playing fast and loose with the show notes today. I apologize, Jason.
You're moving stuff all around. You're getting registrations wrong. We'll talk about this at our next performance review.
The Ural A320 that landed in the field because the pilots forgot that they had the gear down and ran out of fuel is almost completely parted out.
Oh, put it back together. Fly it out.
I know. There were plans to, I don't know how.
Maybe hopes, aspirations.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were plans.
Something.
Yeah.
To fly it out of there when the ground froze and they were going to build a runway in a field, and that would have been awesome. But instead, they dismantled it, and the engines have been removed. The radom's been taken off. Anything useful's been carted away, and now it's down to basically the fuselage and the actual wings themselves. So that's supposed to be done in the next couple of weeks. You can tell that Jason and I are kind of sad about this.
Yeah, I'm kind of.
It would have been awesome to see.
Not just an aircraft dying, but we wanted to see it.
I know. But now for the more in-depth conversation about Russian aviation. This is from a preliminary report from the Interstate Aviation Committee, which investigates accidents in Russia, regarding the Gazprom Avia Superjet crash. The aircraft was being ferried after maintenance back to Moscow and crashed into a forest. And in our initial conversation about the preliminary report, which came out a while ago, we talked about how there are a lot of similarities to the 737 MAX MCAS software here, where the aircraft systems were pushing the nose of the aircraft down continuously and against and overriding the input of the pilots who were trying to pull it up. We also mentioned that the similarities to the mechanisms are quite different, whereas with the Gazprom Avia Superjet, what was happening was bad information from a pair of angle of attack sensors. So the problem with the 737 MAX was a design and software issue where it was only taking data from one angle of attack sensor. In this case, it was feeding bad data to the Superjet through both angle of attack sensors. And so the manufacturer of the Superjet put out a bulletin that said, this is how you should deal with these situations following this crash. But what we're learning now is that the pilots understood that they had a problem. The problem seemed to be resolved. And so as they were climbing, they cleaned up the airplane. They put the flaps up, they raised slats, everything kind of into a clean configuration. And that's really where they ran into more trouble, because the angle of attack sensors assumed that the angle of attack was too high. The angle of attack protection kicked in and it pushed the nose down. This eventually led to them disengaging the autopilot, which allowed manual thrust, which allowed the aircraft's speed to accelerate. When the speed accelerated, the aircraft wants to push up. That made the angle of attack protection get more aggressive in pushing the nose down. And the angle of attack protection was more dominant than the ability of the pilots to pull back on the side stick. And that drove the aircraft into the ground.
So very similar to the MAX. It kind of crazy that the issue with the MAX was that it was a really bad system relying on one single point of failure. And here you have the Superjet relying on twin-sourced information from two angle of attack sensors that were feeding bad information. But I can't help but wonder if the Superjet doesn't also have a simple stabilizer trim cutout switch, just as the MAX does, and a simple switch that the flight crews on MAXs have been trained to hit if MCAS runs away with the aircraft. Was that not a part of the training for the Superjet? I'm sure it must have that kind of capability, right? Kind of feels like that's what they probably should have done, but really hard to second guess that, since I don't think anyone here is anywhere near an expert on SSJ Superjet systems, unfortunately.
Yeah. So one of the issues the IAC is looking into is how and when the crew used the quick reference procedures regarding invalid airspeed. And that their use of it or not use of it is what the committee is looking into. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the final report and what recommendations they make for the aircraft moving forward. It's once again time to talk about ultra low-cost carriers and their continuing effort to try and become one ultra low-cost carrier. Frontier has made another bid for Spirit Airlines while they are still in Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Spirit says, no thanks, and calls the offer woefully insufficient. Is this negotiation?
Here we go again, I guess? Jeez, go on.
What's interesting here is that Frontier says, hey, we still think this is a good idea until we don't think it's a good idea. Frontier is saying that their plan to purchase Spirit is better for Spirit, better for the business, better for their stakeholders, and, quote, generates meaningful value for your stakeholders in excess of that generated by the plan you currently have on file with the bankruptcy court. So that's interesting. And then they end the letter that they sent to Spirit saying, quote, we continue to believe that under the current standalone plan, Spirit will emerge highly levered, losing money at the operating level, and this would not be a transaction we would pursue. As a result, time is of the essence.
Yes, it is. I guess it's no surprise this is happening when with Spirit going through bankruptcy proceedings. All their dirty laundry is on the table. Everything that is Spirit and its business is now basically public knowledge. There are no secrets at this point. I haven't really looked at the numbers since this just happened earlier today, but I would have to imagine the deal for Spirit and its shareholders is a whole lot worse than it was the last time we went around this merry-go-round.
I mean, how much money have lawyers made since
That's the only thing that matters, Ian. The only thing between this failed merger and the JetBlue failed merger and the
bankruptcy and the
Alliance thing with JetBlue, the lawyers are killing it in the low-cost carrier sector in the U.S. The airlines themselves are tanking. But let's say, given the grim future for Spirit and the shifting political climate in the U.S., it does seem like the ultimate result will be Spirit and Frontier merging in some sort of hostile fashion, I'd imagine. I don't foresee JetBlue doing something stupid again and injecting itself. They've got enough of their own problems, which we'll get to. But who else would possibly interject themselves here? Allegiant? I don't see that happening. No, there's really nobody left to throw their hat in the ring. So it's for Spirit to play its cards and see what hand it's dealt.
Good luck, everybody.
Sure.
And speaking of things that will need a whole lot of luck to ever see the light of day, the government of the United Kingdom is once again in favor of a third runway at Heathrow.
Sure. Is it that time of year already?
What is all I have to say about that. Like, what are we doing? Either get out some shovels and start digging, or just leave it alone.
Yeah, this one is tricky. Heathrow is one of the most constrained airports in the world. What is it? It's got 2 runways and is a massive hub for multiple airlines. London's busiest airport. I assume it's London's busiest airport. Should probably look that up. Sorry for Gatwick lovers.
It's London's busiest airport.
It's London's busiest airport. But I love how they're pitching this as a third runway. It may seem bad for the environment, but actually it's environmentally positive. Because if anyone listening has flown to Heathrow, you have probably done a couple circles somewhere over the UK because there's just not enough runway capacity. So a third runway could potentially smooth that out so you don't have to do circles over the United Kingdom before you land. But let's be realistic. I'm sure they will saturate the capacity of that third runway real quick, and we probably will end up back in this situation in however long it takes to get there.
Instead of having 4 holds, we'll have 6 holds.
Amazing. We did it. Didn't the original plan for the third runway at Heathrow involve running it literally right through BA's headquarters in Waterside? Is that still a thing? Because that's just funny.
I honestly don't know what the plan is at this point, but I'm sure we'll see some sort of revival and everyone will forget about it again.
If a shovel hits dirt for this project, we will bring it to you.
Yes. The dirt and the shovel.
Yes.
Individually. Everyone who listens to this episode will get a dirt and a shovel.
A dirt. One dirt.
A dirt. One dirt. Oh. Things that are actually happening. Lufthansa is taking a 10% stake in Air Baltic. This is part of the run-up to Air Baltic's expected IPO. Lufthansa Group will also get a seat on the board, and the stake will be convertible into shares in a public Air Baltic. So this is good for Air Baltic because it gives them money. And I guess it's good for Lufthansa Group because their stated goal is to own at least a part of every airline in Europe.
At least half. Whatever IAG isn't allowed to have, Lufthansa Group will have. And
there you go.
Every airline in the UK. Back in 2019, I tweeted out at the time that by 2025, there will only be 5 airlines left in the world, all belonging somehow to IAG or Lufthansa Group. And we're not quite there yet, but we're making progress.
We're working on it.
It's trending that way. It does seem like a low amount. What is it? $14 million for 10% of Air Baltic, giving it a valuation of, what is that, $140 million? That seems quite low for Air Baltic, considering their fleet size. So it really feels like Lufthansa got a pretty good deal here.
Yeah, and perhaps a discount here. But Air Baltic's, they're continuing to execute on the plan that they charted, and that includes wet leasing their capacity to various airlines. And in this case, they are planning on wet leasing up to 5 A220s with a new Uruguayan airline. So Uruguay's been without an airline for a few years now. And a new startup is trying to get off the ground. SUA, Líneas Aéreas, is trying to begin service to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile from Montevideo. And airBaltic says, yeah, we'll give you up to 5 aircraft and teach you how to run an airline. So good for them.
Yeah, if there's nothing airBaltic loves doing more than operating its own airline, it's operating somebody else's airline.
Yeah. So that'll be fun to see airBaltic aircraft flying around in South America.
I'd have to imagine they'd get repainted or something if they're going to be dedicated to Uruguayan airline, but maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out. Let's go much bigger than the A220. And we'll talk about Boeing, which confirmed once again, I think for the third time maybe, that Lufthansa is the launch operator of the 777X. As part of their full year financial review, Boeing stated that the 777X is now slated for delivery for the first time in 2026. Editor's note, sure. Lufthansa has 27 777-9 passenger variants on order, as well as 7 777-8Fs. The issue as far as the 777X as Lufthansa is concerned is they're having difficulties certifying the seats, which has been an issue with the 787 as well, because Lufthansa came up with these intricate Allegris seats, and it's been challenging to have them certified.
Yes, if only they had a decade to prepare for this moment.
If only.
If only. It's a good thing Boeing isn't able to deliver airplanes because Lufthansa doesn't have seats for them.
Oh, everything old is new again.
Yeah.
Sticking with Boeing, Boeing delivered to United Airlines United's 1,000th mainline aircraft this week, a 737-9 MAX.
Making it the largest airline by even yet another metric.
So this is November 77584, which was in the past week flown from Seattle to Seattle, to Seattle to Seattle, to Seattle to Seattle.
And somehow this is almost different
4
airports.
airports.
Yeah, okay. It flew from Renton to Boeing Field, and then Boeing Field to Boeing Field, and then Boeing Field to SeaTac via Eastern Washington. But no, via Idaho, because of course.
Via Idaho. They went all the way to Idaho.
That's a long way to get cross town.
It's a potato overview.
We love the Seattle airport shuffle. And for anyone wondering, why would a United aircraft go to Seattle after being delivered, even though it's not a United hub? Well, it's a hub for maintenance for United. It's where they induct a lot of aircraft. That and Portland, I think they get a lot of United
Portland,
aircraft.
Rockford,
kind of all over
Illinois.
the place.
And there's one in the southeast that I can't remember right now.
Let's say Atlanta, I'm going to make up. But whatever. United actually already has had its 1,001 aircraft delivered. That goes to Airbus with an A321neo, and it expects to take its 1,002nd aircraft, a MAX 8, tomorrow or yesterday, if you're listening to this the day the podcast comes out. So
there you go.
That's a lot of aircraft, considering every airline in the world is yelling about how it can't get any aircraft delivered.
Well, remember, United would have already had its 1,000th aircraft probably sometime early last year if Airbus and Boeing could deliver on time.
Yeah, I don't think we have this anywhere in the show, but American had announced just a couple days ago that it is also exceptionally upset at not just Boeing, but Airbus for not being able to deliver aircraft. And it's actually cutting or reducing some routes this coming summer because of its delays with the 787-9 and probably also, let's be realistic, with the A321 XLR or LR, whatever they're taking. Nobody is able to deliver aircraft on time, but it is acutely an issue with Boeing. But what else is new?
And let's note that this is 1,000 mainline aircraft.
Yes.
This isn't 1,000 aircraft operating for United Airlines, because that number stands at near 1,500.
We love regional jets here in this country.
We sure do.
For better or worse,
sure
we got a whole lot of them.
Let's stick with Boeing for just a minute because we've got a note here. We talked about their financial performance last week with regards to Q4, but this week in their discussion of the 2024 full year financial performance, they confirmed that they've lost $11.8 billion in 2024, taking their total losses since the first 737 MAX crash close to $40 billion.
It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
It went somewhere, but not to me and not to Boeing.
No. Pratt & Whitney also reported their financial performance. And as part of that, we got some information about how the geared turbofan situation is shaking out. JetBlue also giving us a bit of information there. So JetBlue specifically saying that it will be, quote, hitting peak AOG in about 1 to 2 years, leaving mid to high teens numbers of aircraft grounded in 2025, with that number set to increase in 2026, early 2027. Overall, 17% of the A320neo family is grounded, 25% of A220s are grounded, and 25% of Embraer E2s are grounded. Now, we can't say for sure that these are all grounded due to geared turbofan engines. Some could be down for extended maintenance. Some could, have been hit by a series of golf balls or something. But
wait, what?
I don't know.
Was that just the first thing that came off the top of your head? A series of golf balls?
I don't know. It's like like a guy, like a Caddyshack reenactor is playing next to the hangar. I don't know.
Sure.
But the moral of the story is that these are huge numbers.
I feel like we're in a Groundhog Day situation here where we keep hearing, it's going to be, it's going to peak this situation in 1 to 2 years. And we've been hearing that since like 2019. But for JetBlue to say they're not even going to hit peak broken Airbus or I guess, just Airbus aircraft for 1 to 2 years from now. So we're looking to 2027 at this point with this issue. That's wild.
We're looking at peak. 2030 before this is cleared up.
Peak. We won't even be on the decline until then. This issue it won't stop. I don't feel like it gets enough acknowledgement in the industry for how much damage this has done. But wow, I just can't believe it's still this bad and will still be this bad for years to come.
And Pratt & Whitney, for its part, because it is still this bad, paid $1.1 billion in compensation to airlines in 2024 and expects a similar level of payments to airlines this year as well.
Seems low. It seems much lower than it should be.
Somehow they still managed a profit of $2.2 billion.
Yeah. Well, is that like RTX as a whole or just Pratt & Whitney?
No, that's Pratt & Whitney.
Yeah, that 1.1 billion number, that's got to come up. That's crazy. This is literally putting entire airlines out of business. It's putting people out of work because if airlines don't have enough airplanes, they have to lay people off because there's nobody to fly and nobody to operate those aircraft. They don't need them. 1.1 seems just woefully inadequate. And I hope there's some very heavy negotiating on the side of airlines to pump up those numbers because it doesn't seem right that Pratt & Whitney would be able to turn such high profit figures when they are half a decade into completely screwing over this industry.
I can't argue with that.
Okay.
So let's go talk about Airbus.
Okay.
In 2021, Airbus unveiled the City Airbus NextGen, which was a multi-rotor urban air mobility thingy that was going to carry 4 passengers, be completely battery operated, and frankly looked pretty cool. I got to see the thing when we were there, and it was one of the better looking and seemingly more functional versions of whatever this new segment of aircraft are. They say, no, we're not doing that. The batteries just aren't good enough. We don't have enough power to operate these things. They're going to continue test flying it and use everything they learn to feed future endeavors, but they are not going to officially launch this program and bring it to market at this time.
You really can't help but wonder what is going to happen to the multitude of other eVTOL, not operators, but prospective manufacturers who are doing what Airbus it looked at doing here and said, no, it can't be done efficiently or economically. We've got a lot of airlines, especially here in the US, chomping at the bit to launch exactly this kind of thing with exactly this kind of aircraft. And if you have someone like Airbus saying, it's not going to work, it raises the level of skepticism towards all these others quite a bit. But man, I don't know what to make of this.
I think you just made it. I think that's what I take away from it,
Okay.
is what you just mentioned.
Yeah, Airbus has got other things cooking. They are doing things with hydrogen as well. When are we getting that A380 modified with a hydrogen-powered rotor engine thingy on the side? Is that this year? Is that this year or next year?
No, it's not this year.
Oh well.
Sorry.
Oh, well.
It'll be eventually. But what Airbus is also doing is closing up the Beluga shop.
No.
Yes.
Why? That was so quick.
Well, because it didn't work.
But it was so quick. They only started like last year.
Yeah, I know. So to their credit, they figured out really fast that it didn't work, and they're done with it. So what happened is Airbus used the Beluga, which is based on the A300, to move around aircraft components as they were building their aircraft. As they started building larger aircraft and designing them a bit differently, they said, oh, we need bigger Belugas. And that's where the Beluga XL fleet comes in. So that's based on the A330. Now, they say, we have this fleet of regular old Belugas. What do we do with them? Oh, we can use them for cargo transport. Think, Airbus helicopter deliveries to Japan, carrying loads of golf balls to where
I knew you were going somewhere with that.
A220s are located. And so they said this would be good. And in theory, that was a good idea. The problem is that the Beluga is such a specialized aircraft, and it's designed to carry Airbus aircraft components that are from an Airbus manufacturing facility to an Airbus final assembly line, where they have all the special tooling and jigs to offload and load the aircraft available. It turns out that if you have to carry all of that stuff with you, it's not operationally efficient. It costs too much money, and it's just too hard to do. So they said, yeah, we're done.
What is Airbus going to do with the fleet of Belugas?
They've moved the Beluga, or are moving the Belugas back to the Airbus Transport AOC. So out of it, they're closing up the airline. They're going to move them back so they can operate them for Airbus stuff if they need to, while they figure out what to do with them. I'm petitioning for one in my backyard.
Okay.
As a retirement kind of museum piece where I can just kind of have that. I think that would be cool. But beyond that, I don't know what their plans are for
I'd imagine
the 5 aircraft.
One of them's going to find their way to a museum at some point, and that's a mighty big get to have a Beluga in your aviation museum. That would be pretty cool.
I hope one comes to a museum near me. London City wants a new approach for A320neos. Right now, the London City Airport operates with a steep 5.5 degree glide slope, which requires special certification for the aircraft, special certification for the crews, and is very specialized. And the airport says, okay, but what if you allowed us to operate A320neos in? Because they won't let us expand the airport. They don't want to have more flights. But if we have A320neos, those hold more passengers, same number of flights, more people. And so the application is for an RMP AR, so our required navigation performance authorization required. So that's basically the ability to fly non-standard glide slope, so less than 5.5 degrees, but greater than 3, so somewhere around 4 maybe, who knows. You also get a better continuous descent, and you can operate around terrain. It's a super interesting, very precise approach. We'll see if the UK government goes for it.
Yes, and remember, the largest aircraft to have operated scheduled flights out of London City, I believe, was the Airbus A318, which is no longer really a thing for anyone, especially anyone operating to London City. So a 320neo would be a big bump, since the 319neo doesn't really exist in Europe or Americas or really anywhere outside of China, I think. That's a big aircraft. I'm trying to picture a 186 passenger load at a gate at London City, and I'm failing in my head to see how that's going to work. Because most aircraft at London City, they are, your 76, maybe 100 seat aircraft. I don't even know if they have those. So a BA A320 rolling in with 186 seats, that's wild. I don't see how that's going to work. Presumably they'll figure it out.
The interesting thing here is that this is geared towards low-cost carriers. And if
that'll be even worse.
You think about low-cost carriers operating the A320. So basically, this is a pitch to get EasyJet to fly to London City.
Oh, please. No. That's chaos. No. I mean, realistically, it's not just, you're going to have a bigger aircraft. It means everything the airport does has to be supersized, from bag claim to check-in to security to the gates, which are not physically big enough for that kind of thing. It's not just certify the aircraft and send her in. It's, can this airport actually handle passenger loads that high? If you've ever been to London City, you're probably struggling to figure how that could work.
Where are they going to put all those folks?
Struggling to figure how that's going to work. How's that going to work?
We'll find out if we get to find out.
Okay.
In a follow-up from a 2020 story, India and China have once again agreed to resume direct flights between the two countries. Following a border clash in 2020 that killed soldiers on both sides, China and India suspended all manner of cooperations, including direct flights between the two countries. Flights between India and Hong Kong eventually resumed, but not mainland China. Now the two countries have agreed in principle to resume flights at either country's earliest convenience. So nothing on the schedule yet, but things moving in the right direction as far as direct flights between those two countries are concerned.
Hey, that's great. I think I remember reading about this. What was it? Cranky Flyer, I think, put out something about the demand between India and China, and how there's so much demand and there were so many flights before this. And there's literally zero right now. There are no flights between India and China, which is crazy. So it is really good to see that this is finally coming to some sort of beginning of an end.
Yeah. So we'll see how many and which airlines begin operating as quickly as possible. This is a follow-up to a story that we talked about last year, I think, at this point. But there has been some court activity, and now it just gets even better.
Oh, we got a good ending to a really good story.
So this is, I don't know if we'll call it an ending, but it's definitely close to the final chapter. I'm trying to find the exact date here. $24 million in gold bars and cash were stolen from an Air Canada warehouse a few years ago. And that in and of itself was a crazy event because the thieves used a reused waybill for shrimp to claim the pallet full of gold.
And then they just walked out the loading dock with it.
They drove off with it. Well, Brinks, the company that was transporting the cash and gold, said, "Hey, Air Canada, you should have done a better job not letting this happen. We paid you to keep our stuff safe. You owe us the full amount."
$21,528,000. That's a lot of money.
And Air Canada said, whoa. We owe you for the inconvenience, but our payments are limited by air convention, and we only owe you a few teens of thousands of dollars. We are not paying you tens of millions.
Explain how, because I heard that there's something about Brinks putting something on a shipping form. What did they put on that shipping form? Can you read that to me?
Do you want me to read it verbatim?
I do.
Okay. What they put on the shipping label was gold, 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 gold.
There's one more gold. You forgot a gold.
Did I miss a gold?
You missed the gold because without that gold, it's meaningless. Yeah. Where did they put gold, 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 gold?
So The gold doesn't matter. What matters is they declared a value on how much the shipment was to the customs officials. But what a judge found was that because Brinks failed to note the value of the shipment on the form where Air Canada says, how much is your shipment worth? And do we need to do anything special? They didn't put a number in there. And so the judge ruled that Air Canada is basically only liable for losing their luggage.
Oof, that's bad. Should have put an air tag in it.
So the crux of the matter here is basically they didn't complete the form and say, what happened was Brinks said, hey, please pay special attention to this. And Air Canada said, what do you want us to pay special attention to? These are your rights. These are our responsibilities. If you want us to do something else, you have to pay more money and we'll take different care of your stuff. And they didn't do that. And so the judge said, no, they only have to pay 9,998 special drawing rights. And the special drawing rights are basically the average of a basket of currencies. And it works out to about 13,000 US dollars.
Oh, that's like one business class upgrade round trip.
Oof.
Ouch. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they have not recovered the gold and banknotes or found out who did this, right?
They have made some arrests and they have persons of interest that they are looking for, but not everyone has been apprehended. And they sold the gold. They melted down the gold at a Toronto jewelry store and sold it.
Nice.
So it's gone.
There's got to be a movie coming about this at
There
some
better
point.
be.
This is like
There
one
better be.
of the major subplots from the old movie Goodfellas, which part of it documents the Lufthansa heist.
The Lufthansa heist, yeah.
The Lufthansa heist. It's very similar where the Lufthansa heist, they just paid off a guy at JFK and then they walked out the front door with the gold, or what was it, the money or the gold? I think it was money. In this case, they just forged some shrimp documents and literally loaded it on a truck with a forklift and drove away. Stealing very valuable items from airports seemingly hasn't gotten any more complicated in the decades since the Lufthansa heist.
Looking at the waybill, it's just like, how could anybody read this? I mean, it's like, what? None of this looks legit. All of this looks like somebody found a dry cleaning receipt in somebody's pocket and decided to go claim their pallet of gold.
And said, I wonder if I can cross out the word shrimp and write gold instead. And apparently you can.
You can, yeah.
Okay.
You can. Thanks, dot matrix printers. So we'll see if that's the end of that story. But I want to find out, kind of what happens to everybody who took part in the heist, because that rounds out the movie. This next story is almost as equally strange. A Saudia aircraft was delayed because they seized the aircraft's fuel and charts over an unpaid EU 261 compensation claim.
Yes, they apparently a company called EU Claim, which I believe is a firm that handles EU 261 compensation claims on behalf of passengers who believe they are owed. Apparently, I assume they went through the court system and they didn't just, walk on board the aircraft, and allegedly they got an order, but they seized the fuel and the nav charts from a Saudia, I think it was a 777-300ER, because Saudia just was not paying out what passengers were apparently legally owed. Apparently it was over 50,000 euros still owed. That's not chump change, but this is not the first time this happened. It is not the last time it will probably happen. Kind of crazy that it gets to this level. A company has to literally seize the fuel from an aircraft to get a major airline like Saudia to pay up what's rightfully owed. But what's most important is that the aircraft was under 1 hour delayed and did not trigger yet another EU 261 claim.
That would have been the icing on the cake right there.
I'd have to imagine they would claim it was outside of the airline's control.
I don't know,
but that's for a company like EU Claim to figure out and fight for.
And round we go.
This is not an endorsement of EU Claim. I've never heard of them before, but bravo to them doing what they got to do to get their customers paid and get their probably 40 to 60% cut.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other story. Good news for Jason.
I love
Porter
good news
Airlines
for
is
me.
coming to LaGuardia.
Yes.
And you get to ride a raccoon, right? That's how it works?
That's exactly how it works. I at least get to
All
pet
right.
one sitting next to me
Okay.
on the flight. This is, we wouldn't ordinarily talk about this, but it's a new airline at LaGuardia. That doesn't happen all too often. Up to 3x daily from Toronto, the real airport, YYZ, down to LaGuardia on E195 E2s, which again, not an aircraft we've probably ever gotten at LaGuardia or at all here really in the US. We don't have those. We're not allowed to have those. So it's nice to have Porter, literally not allowed to have those, but it's nice to have another option. And in the very same week, that'll be the third Canadian airline to start services at LaGuardia, because I hear WestJet is coming back for some reason. Not sure why, but excited for Porter. It's always been a Newark airline flying to Toronto City Airport. So different airports, so it's still a thing over at Newark, but I'm excited for the raccoon to come to New York.
There you go. And then last thing is a follow-up on a story that we talked about last week where JetBlue is now accepting Venmo. The marketing rationale is that you can now split your travels on JetBlue with an entire group more easily, and it's good for everybody. Sure, why not? It didn't really make sense to Jason or I. But someone who works in the payments industry got in touch with us and mentioned that it could be because if you also accept Venmo, you get much less, relatively speaking, you have to pay the transaction fees you are charged by the payment processor are much less if you're dealing with PayPal. And, 0.1 or 0.2% on a few $1 million every year, it adds up. So at that point, why not accept Venmo as well? Somebody else wrote in and gave their 2 cents saying, well, perhaps it's because some people can't get a credit card or bank card. I'm less swayed by that because it seems more virtuous than we just want to save money and we can spin it in a marketing way to also accept Venmo. So I'm leaning more towards that one, but I'm keen to hear what you think, Jason.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't see much weight to yes, there are plenty of people who can't get a credit card, but getting a bank account with a debit card is pretty non-trivial. But hey, if you've got balance in your Venmo account, go for it. Pay
there you
JetBlue
go.
That way, whatever. If it saves JetBlue a percentage of a point on processing fees, trust us, they need it more than you do.
They will spend some money on a press release to get that money back in their pocket. All right. Episode 305 of AvTalk has come to an end. And wow, it was a full episode.
Very. We talked about golf balls twice.
Raccoons,
I think.
And all sorts of good fun stuff. All right. This has been episode 305 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.